and welcome to the Confusion to Clarity podcast. This podcast is for anybody who needs that reminder that they really are capable of achieving amazing things. Each week, we will be diving deep into all things mindset, manifestation, and spirituality. Hosted by me, Natalie, a clinical hypnotherapist, psychotherapist, coach, mum, and lover of all things mindset and manifestation. When listening, I want to give you a break from reality. I'm going to share with you the tools and techniques that you need to make your goals reality so you can stop playing small. Hello and welcome back to the Confusion to Clarity podcast. I hope you are all well and that you've had a brilliant week. So as I'm recording this, the heat wave is back. If you listened to last week's episode, I shared my views on the hot weather that we had had. And it is now back as I'm recording this, just looking at my laptop. It's 33 degrees, which, as I said last time, might not be hot to many of you listening, but here it absolutely is. So as I'm recording this, I've had to shut the windows and doors in my office and I don't have aircon. And I couldn't put the fan on because it was too noisy. So I am very hot recording this and I'm slightly concerned it might impede my ability to record this episode, make sense, and remember the points that I wanted to talk about. But we'll see how we go. So this week, I wanted to revisit a topic we spoke about on the podcast, I think it was a couple of years ago, which was all about how words create our reality and the power of our words. What I wanted to do today is use this episode as a reminder of that, but dive a little bit deeper and not just the words, but the conversations we have with ourselves. So, what prompted me to think about this again? A lot of the clients who come and work with me will regularly say, I have this inner monologue that is constantly critiquing me. It's so noisy, this inner voice, it just doesn't stop. It's bombarding me with all the things I should be doing, shouldn't be doing, could be doing, and it is draining and exhausting. And this is what this episode is about. It's not about the conversations you have with other people per se, but the conversations you are having with yourself. So, for a moment now, ask yourself, what kind of conversations have you been having inside your mind? Now, this is not me saying that you're hearing voices, absolutely not. But most of us do have that inner monologue, although there are some people that don't. I have a client and it's called aphantasia. I believe that's what it's called, where you can't visualize and image things. And this client doesn't have an inner monologue, which I find is just insane. I say to her, but how do you know when to do things? And she's like, well, I just do them. And I said, but what about that constant chatter? Like, remember you've got to pick Blake up at 12:30 and you've got to be here at 6 and you've got a client at this time and you need to post that and da-da-da. She's like, it's just not there. I'm like, tell me more. This sounds insane. I need to hear this. This sounds like the dream. And yeah, she doesn't have it. But for many of us, we do have that inner voice. We do have that inner monologue. And very often it can be critical, berating, draining, especially if your nervous system is dysregulated and you're maybe experiencing overwhelm and anxiety, or have experiences from the past that are still living within you and shaping your day-to-day life. So, as I said, this is something that comes up a lot with clients, conversations I have, but it was also thinking about my own life. Now, I think I've shared this on the podcast before because the story is of two halves, technically. One half is your conversations affect your reality, or I believe on this occasion it did, but also a bit of manifesting as well. So 2 years ago, we were going on a family holiday, or we went on a family holiday to Florida. I think for some reason we were going on like a Thursday. In the run up to this holiday, we were all so busy. There was loads going on at school with the kids, and my husband and I are both self-employed. So obviously taking time off requires a lot of organizing and planning and prepping. Generally, when we go away, it's pretty hectic, but this time more so than usual. We had been working right up until the day. So we were going on the Thursday. The Wednesday, we were both working. I'd worked the evening. He had worked the whole day. And then it was trying to finish packing, we had to go and change up some money. And then the other thing, we had bought a Ring doorbell and we'd bought it a few weeks before, but again, being busy, we hadn't had time to install it. Again, telling yourself you're busy becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, I know, but at this time, genuinely, there was a lot going on. So not only were we trying to prep for a holiday, he was also installing a Ring doorbell at like 11 o'clock at night. So by the time we went to bed, it was at 1 a.m. Now, the one thing we kept repeating the whole duration of that week is, oh my gosh, we just need one more day. It doesn't feel like we're going on holiday. It's all come around so quickly. We just need one more day. We just need one more day to get on top of things, and then we'll feel ready to go on holiday. We really were saying this on repeat, and internally I was definitely saying this, and that wasn't because I didn't want to go on holiday, but because I was feeling overwhelmed, to be quite honest. And anyway, we got everything done just about, and we woke up in the morning and we were rushing around again. And I think we had to be at the airport for like midday or something. So got to the airport, chaos. It was the summer holidays. And we checked in for our flight, dropped our bags off, got the boarding passes, and then we breathed a sigh of relief and we're like, oh, right, we're here now. We made it. Yes, we feel a bit frazzled, but activate holiday mode. Went to go through security, tapped our boarding passes, and we had this like beeping sound, like random. So one of the security officers come over and I said, oh, my boarding pass won't let us through. She was like, yeah, your flight's been cancelled. Sorry, what? Do you mean my flight's been cancelled? We've checked in, they've got my bags. And she was like, yeah, your flight's cancelled. And I was like, oh my goodness. And instantly I just felt this wave of absolute horror and emotion, because this was a holiday that we had been looking forward to. The kids were looking forward to it. And I said, what do we do now? And by this point, there were loads of other people all on the same flights, experiencing the same thing. And she's like, well, you'll just have to go back down to the check-in area. We've gone back down to the check-in area, and it was carnage, because they didn't just cancel our flight, they cancelled the other flight that was going like an hour later as well. And this was a big airline. I'm not going to name names, but they were a big airline and they cancelled both the flights. So there were hundreds of people, and it was awful because they were two Florida flights. So you had loads of families all doing the whole big Disney thing. They were there with their Disney ears and t-shirts, and there were kids crying all over the place, adults crying. So obviously this is a big, expensive trip. And the ground staff were just saying, well, we can't help you because we're not actually employees of said airline. And they said, you'll have to ring them directly. So excellent. So I said, look, right, let's ring them. And we were on hold for an hour. So we just kind of camped up in the side of the terminal with all these other people. And I could hear other people around me. And some people I could hear were being rebooked like the next day, 2 days later, but via New York, via Atlanta. I was thinking, oh my God, like this is going to be awful. We're going to miss so many days of our holiday. I was like, oh, this is so annoying. And then something clicked in me, and I was just like, I've got to stop this anxious chatter and talk. So I was like, right, fine. Do you know, I surrendered, and I literally just went, fuck it. It's going to work out. I don't know how or why, but just like, I can't stress anymore. So we were on the phone to their airline, and in the meantime, we'd phoned my parents who had our dogs. The villa we were staying in was managed by a friend of mine, so I messaged her and was like, our flight's been cancelled. Can we move the dates of the villa? And after a further hour, so 2 hours of waiting on the phone, we finally got through to somebody. And this lady was really lovely and she was so helpful. And she was like, okay, look, we can get this sorted for you. And they basically managed to get us a flight the next day from Heathrow. So this was Gatwick. But she said, what we'll do is, because of the whole commotion and the fact you'll need to be at the airport early, we'll book you a hotel the night before. Oh, because that was the other thing, sorry. You can fly from Heathrow, but not directly to Orlando. You're going to have to go to Manchester first and then fly from Manchester to Orlando. So I was like, okay, look, I'm just grateful to be going the next day. Like, that's absolutely fine. So we then had to get a taxi from Gatwick to Heathrow. They booked us into a hotel overnight, and we were rebooked the next morning to go from Heathrow to Manchester. And then actually flew on a different airline from Manchester to Orlando. And when we got to the hotel where we were staying for the night, we both just looked at him like, did we make that happen? Because all we were doing the whole time was like, it's too busy. We just need one more day. We just need one more day. And we ended up manifesting one extra day. Now, I know logically people are going to say, well, you didn't make that happen. And maybe we didn't. However, being a very spiritual woo woo girly who believes in manifesting and the law of attraction, I'm kind of think we did. But if anything, it worked in our favor because then we had that extra night. So we had the ability just to breathe and catch our breath. And the next day, it all went seamlessly because after that, I was very conscious of the stories I was telling myself. And this isn't me saying, oh, we make bad things happen. No, I'm not saying that. But, I do think where you place your words and attention makes a big difference to how you feel or what you see in your reality. So as soon as I switched my inner monologue at that airport after I'd gone, just like, fuck it, it's going to work out. It's all going to work out. I don't know how, I don't know the specifics, but we're going on holiday. It's going to happen. We're going a day later. So we managed to move the villa. My parents were okay to have my dogs for an extra couple of days. And we managed to move the car higher. So everything got shifted by like 24 hours. So we had the night in the hotel, and then the next morning we woke up and we're like, God, I just feel so much more refreshed and I feel so much more ready to go on this holiday. Side note to this story, the morning that we'd got to Heathrow to take the internal flight to Manchester, my sister phoned me and she's like, have you seen the news? And I'm like, no, I haven't. Do I want to see the news? And she's like, there's a massive air traffic control issue. She said it's affecting the whole of Gatwick. She said no flights are leaving, but luckily Heathrow was okay. And so was Manchester. So had they booked us from Gatwick the next day, which is what I was originally hoping they were going to do because I live right by Gatwick Airport, we could have just gone home and come back. That flight would have been cancelled as well. So we wouldn't have gone that day. So actually, it was a real blessing in disguise that we did end up being moved to Heathrow because we weren't affected by the air traffic control issue. And I was just saying to myself, no, it's all going to work out now. The flights are going to be smooth. We're going to transit through. Everything's going to be fine. And then on the plane to Manchester, there were a family behind us. And I could hear them talking about a 9-hour delay from Manchester. And I was thinking, no, I don't want to hear about a 9-hour delay from Manchester. And I think, no, maybe they're not on our flight. They're not going to Orlando. They're not flying with us. It's fine. And they then, I'm not sure why they started speaking to us, and they then said, oh, where are you flying to? We told them. They're like, oh, so are we. That's the flight we're on. And do you know there's a 9-hour delay? And I was like, what? Why? And I think it was to do with this air traffic control thing or something else. And I was like, no, there isn't. No, there's not. There's no 9-hour delay. We are going on this flight and it's all going to work out and it's all going to be fine. And essentially that's what happened. But, and this is where I do think it was a manifestation, when we got to Manchester, we then got upgraded. So they upgraded our seats, which was just incredible. So I feel like it was a story of words creating your reality with a touch of manifesting as well. We had the most amazing holiday, and I was so grateful because everything got pushed back by 24 hours, but realistically, it didn't really make that much of a difference. We still got the same duration. We still got to do all the things we wanted to do. So we were very, very lucky and was extremely grateful for that. And not to mention being upgraded, which was just insane and made what had been a very stressful time a million times better. And really, since then, I've always had that in the back of my mind, like just be mindful of your words and speak into existence what you want to happen. So obviously that's quite a long-winded story. I got carried away there with all the ins and outs. You probably could have heard that in 2 minutes, but I like an in-depth story. I like to know all the details. I like to share them. It's not just the conversations we have with ourselves. It's not just the words we say. It's actually when we're saying those on repeat, they become our beliefs. So our beliefs then shape how we experience the world, and that's exactly how our mind works. Because your mind is always listening, and we've talked about this again on the podcast a number of times, but your nervous system doesn't ask you, is this true? It's asking you all the time, does this feel familiar? Our subconscious is constantly checking for facts. It isn't asking, is this right? Is she right? Are they right? Instead, it's noticing what keeps being repeated. And this applies to conversations. So, what conversations keep coming back up? What seems important? What's being, talked about on repeat? Because repetition signals importance. And think about it this way: if you hear a fire alarm once, you notice it. But if it keeps sounding, then your brain goes, "Oh, hold on, it's continuing, and we better do something about this." And it's the same with your thoughts and how they work. The conversations we repeat become familiar, and familiarity starts to become true. So if you're repeating words that are acting like that fire alarm in your head, caution, danger, warning, then that starts to become your reality and what you see. And that inner monologue is exhausting. Imagine this, right? If you had somebody following you round every single day, standing right behind your shoulder, and every morning they told you, "Oh, you're going to mess this up today. You're bound to say something stupid again." If every time you looked in the mirror they were then saying to you, "Oh, you look awful today. If your hips look really wide in that dress. Why are you wearing that?" If every time you made a mistake, that person behind you told you, "Oh, I knew you'd mess that up." Every time you had an opportunity, they then turned around and said to you, "Oh, I wouldn't bother. It's probably not worth it." And every time you had an anxious moment, that little person behind you said, "Oh, you're never going to get over this." How long would you allow that person to stay there? How long would you allow that to continue? Not very long. It would drive you mad. You would tell them to go away. You would want to get rid of them, because they would be a constant drain on your mental bandwidth, but also your confidence as well. You'd be incredibly anxious knowing they're standing behind you, and you would just be thinking, "Oh, just get rid of them. I can't deal with this." But this is how many of us are spending our lives, carrying around this little person inside our own heads. But the difference is, because it's our voice, we've stopped questioning it. We've mistaken what it says for the truth. Now, side note here, from papers that I've read and research that I've done, they do say that inner voice, whilst it may sound like your own voice, is often made up of the people, the caregivers that you spent the most time around when you were younger. And it's like linked to inner child healing, just kind of taking that down a different path. But essentially, right here, right now, it sounds like your own voice. And obviously, that is what we notice. But like I said, we stop questioning it. We make it, but we believe it's true. We just kind of accept that it's there. But just because we've had these thoughts, these beliefs, these words circling round for 10, 20, 30 years plus, it doesn't mean that they're true. But what it does mean is they've become familiar. And again, like we keep saying, familiarity becomes safety. It becomes what we know. And when clients come to work with me, they very rarely say, "Oh, I have this really critical inner voice," like this little kind of like person standing next to me constantly telling me all of these things. Instead, they say things like, "I'm just being unrealistic," or, "I'm just being truthful. I'm just, being realistic with myself." But when we work together and we slow these conversations down, we actually realize that they're not fact. These words and phrases, these beliefs that we've conditioned in our mind, they've just become habitual. They're rehearsed conversations, but we can change habits. We can change that inner monologue. But what gets even more interesting is your brain isn't just simply listening to these conversations, it will start to look for evidence to support them. And then this is where the science part, which I love, becomes even more interesting, because your reticular activating system, which we've spoken about before, remember the Google search engine in your mind, you have a belief, you put it in, it fires up evidence to back up that belief. That's kicking in here because all these conversations that you're having are influencing your brain to look out and pay attention for those different things. Because every single second we are surrounded by millions of pieces of information: colours, people, sounds, movement, conversation, smells. If we processed everything, we'd become overwhelmed, which many of you might be agreeing with me, going, "Oh, I do feel overwhelmed." And that's why, because your brain's trying to process everything at once. But our brains are incredibly clever, and they filter, as I said, through the reticular activating system. So even if your brain feels overwhelmed, it is filtering out some of the information, just not as much as we would like. So your reticular activating system is looking at everything that's going on around you and noticing what it believes to be important, what actually matters. And we've all experienced this. An example of the reticular activating system working, I know you want to buy a specific pair of shoes, suddenly you see them everywhere. Now, yes, I know people will say algorithms, phones track things. Of course, yeah, we know that. But that aside, you probably will start to notice them in your physical reality. So, there's a specific pair of shoes you want. Every time you're out on the street, you see a woman walking on the road with that pair of shoes or that bag. Or you want to go to a certain destination on holiday, and suddenly everywhere you go, people are going to this specific place, or you're seeing it online. And it's because you're in tune to start noticing it. You're programming your brain to look out for evidence relating to that item, product, holiday, etc. And the thing here is, it's not that there's suddenly more people going to that specific holiday destination. It's not that there's a massive, load of women going out and purchasing these sandals, which, okay, can happen sometimes with fashion items, but you get the gist. It's because you are changing that narrative in your mind and telling your brain to look out for it. You're signaling that it is significant to you and it's looking out for them. So, which is why these conversations that we're having are so important, because it's priming your brain to look out for evidence to back up these beliefs. So if you keep saying to yourself, oh, nothing's going right for me, things are, it's just one of those weeks, what does your brain start to notice? Well, hold on, it suddenly notices that you got a parking ticket, that, somebody made a critical, critiquing comment to you at work, the washing machine broke, somebody pulled out in front of you and then stuck their finger up at you and pissed you off. It's not necessarily that there's more of those things happening, it's just you're in tune to look out for it. So your brain isn't creating the reality, but what it's doing is filtering the reality, and that filter is heavily influenced by the conversations that you repeat. Now, my story, my holiday might sound contradictory to that, because you're saying, well, I couldn't have made that happen, and I couldn't have done. I just think it's very interesting from a spiritual perspective, but that's just me. From a scientific perspective, it's more a case of your words are creating your reality, you're tuning into it, whatever you're thinking about, you're noticing more, you're highlighting, and then obviously that is going to shape your physical reality, but also how you feel mentally as well. But as we touched on there, obviously your brain starts to notice information. Let's stick with the bad day theme or the bad week. It's noticing these kind of different events and logging them. And then we notice, or we then are heading into the trap of what's called confirmation bias. So, confirmation bias is fascinating when you understand what it is, because it starts making so much sense. So, whilst confirmation bias might sound complicated, it's actually really, really simple, because your brain likes consistency. And once it's created a belief, it's going to start gathering evidence to support that belief. So, it's like a little detective building up a case of evidence. So let's just say your brain has decided, I'm just not good enough. From that moment onwards, your detective starts collating clues, building a file, and it will create a real big file, a massive dossier on this belief that you have. So when that friend doesn't reply to you right away, intellectually you might go, oh, she's got young children, she's working, maybe she's just busy. But that part of your brain that's been collating evidence will say, well, she actually did do it last time, and then so and so did it to you as well, and so forgot to meet you. So maybe it is about you. And then another clue comes in, your boss gives you feedback and it's not fully positive, it's maybe some things to work on. Someone walks past you without smiling, then maybe your partner seems distracted. And all these little experiences act as clues, act as evidence. And before long, as we said, this detective has built up a massive case in your mind, trying to prove that belief that you've been telling yourself. In this example, you're not good enough or you don't matter to people. But with the confirmation bias, building evidence for that belief that we have, it's focusing on what it's being programmed to look out for. So I'm not good enough, great, I'm going to look for evidence that backs up that belief, because that's what I'm priming my brain for. But while that's happening, we're not then noticing the things that did go well in that day. So on the same day the friend maybe didn't reply back to you, you got a compliment at work. So maybe you said, oh, you look really radiant today, or I love your dress. A stranger smiles at you. Another friend who you have messages you and just asks how you are. Someone holds a door open for you. You solve a problem that's been on your mind. You make somebody laugh. Where does that evidence go? Because those things are real, they actually happened, and often they go nowhere. Not because they didn't happen, but because those pieces of evidence, those experiences, those examples didn't fit the story. The puzzle piece didn't fit the rest of the puzzle. And when I'm working with clients, the way I structure sessions, I can't speak, I will always ask my clients, first of all, well, in my training, we were trained to not allow clients to talk about anything negative. It was like, okay, what's been good this week? And that's what we had to focus on. And I always found that a little bit dismissive, because our problems are real and we can't gaslight ourselves into not acknowledging those, especially if things have been really significant. But as we just touched on there with the confirmation bias, if our brains are primed to look out for the worst possible case, we're not noticing what's going well, and we overlook that and miss it. So when I'm working with clients, I always say to my clients, like, how's your week been? Honestly, open, tell me how your week's been. And sometimes there are people go, oh, actually, do you know what? It's been a really full-on week. I did feel anxious and this happened and da-da-da. And I always think in therapy, it's a safe space, it's a neutral space. And I always say to my clients, you can say what you want, however you want. There's no judgment here. Offload, let's clear it out. Because sometimes just speaking about what has been annoying and triggering this week is really important, because it's releasing that pressure valve in your head. If you imagine your head's like a pressure cooker, and all of those thoughts are swirling around and the pressure's building up, just by sometimes talking about it in a neutral space allows that pressure valve to be released, the pressure to just go out, and then it creates a void, it creates a space in your brain, in the pressure cooker of your mind, where you can then begin to fill in with what actually did happen, or how you want to be, how you want to feel. So I always let my clients just debrief. Let's just let it go. What I always like to do then is to kind of dive into those examples. So they might say, oh my gosh, I was so busy, I felt really stressed, I was doing all of these things. But then I will say to them, okay, you did all of those things, but you didn't acknowledge to yourself that actually you kept those plates spinning in the air. That's a huge achievement, that actually, despite doing all the things, you got it done. And that's not saying you always have to push yourself to extreme, but we're so quick to not notice the things that we have done well. And then sometimes they'll tell me about their week, and they'll kind of add little snippets in, that they went for coffee with a friend, or they went on a lovely walk, or they went out for a meal. And when we start to highlight these little things, it starts to balance the kind of the scales in your mind. Whereas before, they were very heavily tipped on, it was a crap week, I felt anxious, everything was shit. And then suddenly we start noticing, well, actually, hold on a second, you did do incredibly well. You felt that way, but you still got up every day. You took the kids to school. You remembered all the things that you had to remember. That's a huge achievement. And people are like, oh, yeah, actually, I did. And you felt really anxious, but you still managed to go out for a walk, and you had a lovely walk. And you told me that you went for coffee with your friend, and actually you had a really good laugh about some things that have happened. And it's like, oh, yeah. And it starts to tip those scales back in the other way and have more balance, essentially. And then we begin to see that it's not that, I'm always anxious, or it was a really shit week. It's that your brain was filing away the evidence, backing up that confirmation bias, the story you're telling yourself, I'm anxious, I'm this, I'm that, highlighting the points that supported that belief, and it was overlooking the stuff that was actually balancing it out. And this is why when I'm working with clients, it's not about suddenly saying, oh, we'll just focus on the positives then, because actually you're saying you're really anxious, but this happened this week. So, actually it was quite a good week. And it's not about saying that in some kind of toxic positive way. It's about helping your brain to look at both sides of the story, both parts of the picture, so you can then say, oh, okay, maybe there's another story that I can start telling myself. And it takes time, because a lot of these beliefs, these conversations that we've been telling ourselves on repeat, have been there for years, maybe even sometimes decades, multiple decades. So it's not just suddenly saying, oh, I'll think positively. You did have a nice walk, you did go out for dinner. It doesn't work like that. It's not as simple. And you know those experiences happen because that detective in your brain has all the evidence to physically back up and remind you of examples where things happen that did make you feel that way. So it's not again about, gaslighting yourself, or that didn't happen, or maybe it wasn't as bad. Or a classic people always say is, yeah, but there are other people who have it worse than me. And maybe there are, but that doesn't detract from how you're feeling. Our job is to help you sift through all of those thoughts, make you see what is true versus what isn't true, clear those negative associations from the past, so we can then start to work from a blank canvas. Okay, if I wasn't telling myself this story, what story would I be telling myself instead? And when we start to think about how we want to be, how we want to feel, we start to take ourselves in that direction. Instead of the confirmation bias being led heavily on the kind of the negative, suddenly it starts to notice and log all the things that actually have been positive or are working in our favor, which is why I love subliminals for things like this. So you can download, if you go to past episodes of the podcast, I'll link it below, the Lucky Girl Syndrome subliminals. So that was working with the law of assumption, that everything's working in my favor, things are always conspiring for my highest good. And with subliminals, I'm sure you already know this, you don't hear the spoken word, you just hear the music, the words are underneath, they go straight into your subconscious, having this beneficial reprogramming effect. Great way for cancelling out the negative chatter, combined with clearing those memories on a cellular level, really helping us stop fighting that detective in your brain and instead working with it. So help me to find evidence that backs up how I do want to be, how do I want to feel. And then one question I always ask my clients when we're talking about this is, what story is your mind trying to prove? And that's not necessarily because it's true, but again, as we've been saying, it's all to do with the familiarity. Once we can identify the story, then that's when we can begin to gently start noticing the evidence that doesn't fit it anymore. So, again, like we were just saying, reprogramming, retraining that detective to look out for information that backs up a new belief or dispels the belief that we've been holding on to in a much more gentle way, which is why thinking about how you want to be, how you want to feel is so important and so powerful. So it's called neuroplasticity, and it's the process of reprogramming, creating new neural pathways in our brain that are more in keeping with how we want to be and how we want to feel. And as I said, this is the work I do with my clients, helping them to rewrite this inner program, this inner monologue, help them to release those experiences of the past that they've been holding on to. And again, it's all about safety. Your brain isn't doing this to be, to try and be difficult and awkward. Your brain is holding on to this information because it believes it's equating to your safety. So it's all about, helping that detective in your mind shred the files that are backing up the outdated beliefs and recreate new ones that are more in keeping with how you want to be and how you want to feel. But if you're not in therapy or it's not for you right now, something you can do, which I feel is really powerful, listening to the subliminals. I listen to those Lucky Girl subliminals all the time. It's one of my most downloaded episodes. And we've spoken about scripting before. So writing out how you want to be and feel in the present tense as if those things are happening right here, right now. I love this technique for starting to dispel the old evidence and begin the process of building new evidence, because when you're thinking about how you want to be and feel, as we've been saying, you start to see yourself going in that direction. So write it out as a letter and read it on repeat, a couple of times a day, first thing in the morning, last thing at night. So you're priming your brain with how I want to be, how I want to feel, which is countering out the negative information that your brain was once holding on to. And as always, nervous system regulation. Regulate your nervous system, because although these are positive changes, remember your subconscious isn't interested whether these changes are positive for your highest good. It sees change as a threat, doesn't like it, and will always try and pull you back to that place of familiarity. So it's getting clear on how you want to be and feel, working with myself, working with a therapist on a deeper cellular level, or if that's not for you, utilizing techniques and resources like subliminal audios, writing things out, and most importantly, being kind to yourself. We are so self critical. that kind of concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been useful and made sense. My brain has malfunctioned at points because it is so hot. So poor Nicole will have some editing to do on this episode because I kept forgetting my words because, yeah, I can't cope with the heat. I need to get an aircon unit. I think that's the solution, certainly for next winter, next summer. See, brain's fried. But this week, listen to those conversations in your mind and bring it to your conscious awareness when you're saying those negative things. Do I believe this to be true? Would I say this to a friend? If it was somebody standing behind me saying this, would I tolerate it? Absolutely not. And the first step is bringing awareness to a situation. You don't have to change it overnight. It's not about quick fixes. But when you start to notice these patterns, these habits, that's when you can start to make the shifts and changes. So, I hope you have a wonderful week and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. And if you haven't, please follow the podcast, subscribe, download the episodes. It really helps me to get it out to even more people. All my information will be linked below, so if you have any questions, please reach out. You can do so via my email address or the top of the show notes where it says send fan mail. They'll come directly to me. Even if you just want to send a message to say hi, like, it's nice to hear from people, and all my social media details, etc., etc., etc. So I will speak to you all again soon. Take care.